Visual methodology is the proposal of a non-referential graphic language, namely a language that is unrelated to a specific discipline and devoid of empathy towards the represented object. The author is Anthony Froshaug, a well-known English typographer who is also a lecturer at the Ulm School of Design between 1957 and 1961. Visual methodology is the title of an article written by Froshaug for the fourth issue of the quarterly bulletin of the Hochschule für Gestaltung, published in April 1959. This article proposes an analytical drawing method based on the use of the graph as a tool for spatial analysis. It is an attempt to provide architecture and urban planning with a scientific tool of representation. As remarked by the author, it is advisable to choose problems which have a clearly visible number of solutions. Froshaug applies this graphic method to the analysis of the circulation scheme in Le Corbusier's 1954 house in La Plata. As stated by Froshaug, after this building had been completed, it became clear that the original decisions on the arrangement of the rooms were not correct and the house had to be altered. This reconstruction could have easily been avoided had the circulation scheme been clearly investigated at the beginning. Thus, Froshaug's goal is to analyze the connections between rooms by avoiding all elements that might disturb this focus. This is why he employs the graph, a geometric construction made of only two elements, nodes and connections. Connections exist as links between nodes, while nodes exist as ends of the connections. As a starting point in this method, the rooms of the house are numbered. The presence of connections is then articulated with a 0-1 notation. 0 in the case of absent connections between rooms, 1 in the case of an existent connection. The next step involves entering this data into a numerical matrix. And finally, the last step consists in translating the previous matrix into a geometric figure, or a lattice, with a number of sides corresponding to the maximum number of connections. In order to do this, Froshaug provides several geometric matrices, each returning a certain number of possible connections. In two-dimensional matrices, we have, for instance, 6 triangles equal 6 connecting lines, 3 hexagons equal 3 connecting lines, and others. As for three-dimensional matrices, we have instead rhomboid dodecahedra equal 8 connecting lines, tetrahedra and octahedra equal 12 connecting lines, and others. In the case of Le Corbusier's building, Froshaug notes that the maximum number of connections among rooms equals 5, and this implies that each point of the grid must have a minimum of 5 connections. And this fact emerges from the 4 triangles plus hexagon graph. That is to say, the graph of the house in La Plata reflects the building's functionalism while hiding its plastic form. What is important to note is that this visual methodology has nothing to do with the kind of diagrams like the one produced by Rudolf Wittkower for the Palladian villas. While these diagrams appear as simplified architecture figures, Froshaug's one avoid the analogy between walls and lines and, more generally, renounce to any analogical tendency. Visual methodology is the attempt to produce a knowledge of the inhabited space with an alternative graphic tool to the architectural plan. In addition to the Corbusier's case study, Froshaug shows 2 other examples at the urban scale. One of these concerns a project that was made to alter the main street plan of Zurich between 1955 and 1958. In this case, the high number of connections requires the use of an octahedra, which allows to translate the road pattern into an abstract graph that renders the urban layout without topographic conditioning. To summarize then, Visual methodology is a representation tool that tries to purify architectural and urban design of all the interferences that can intervene in the communication of a specific survey. In this way, it is a universal method that is independent from the abilities and ideas of the individual. Diagrams produced with the visual methodology portray no difference between a good and a bad draftsman. And there is also no difference between a representative building and a non-representative one. Instead, there are rules, then procedures, that can only end up with a result if such rules are correctly performed. Furthermore, we must recognize that for Froshaug, the choice of architecture and the city as objects of study has a precise ideological meaning. In fact, architecture draws upon symbols and meanings of a bourgeois or religious origin, whose persistence is due to the graphic conventions that are rooted in such ideological domains. Against such legacies, the visual methodology is an attempt to remove all disturbing and symbolic components from the drawing. In this, it will reflect Wittgenstein's maxim, whereof one cannot speak, therefore one must be silent.